There is a small Greek island in the Aegean Sea, roughly 30 miles off the coast of Turkey, where something genuinely unusual has been measured. The island is called Ikaria, and over the past 2 decades, researchers studying it have found that its people reach the age of 90 at a strikingly high rate, and that they tend to do so with far less heart disease, far less dementia, and far less of the long, slow decline that so often defines the final decades elsewhere. Now, you will see versions of this story online claiming 0 heart attacks for 200 years, or one miracle oil that prevents them entirely, and it is worth saying plainly at the very start that those claims are not true. No village has 0 heart attacks, and no single oil is a shield against them. The real story is quieter than that, and honestly far more useful, because the things that make Ikaria remarkable are things an ordinary person can actually borrow. The island first drew serious scientific attention as part of a broader effort to map the places on Earth where people live longest and stay healthiest the longest. Researchers and writers came to call these places blue zones, and Ikaria was identified as one of them, alongside Sardinia in Italy, Okinawa in Japan, the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, and a community in Loma Linda, California. What united these scattered places was not a shared climate or a shared genetic line. It was a set of overlapping daily habits, and Ikaria turned out to be one of the clearest living examples of those habits working together over a lifetime. If steady, honest health information is the kind of thing you actually want, subscribing genuinely helps, because the calm and careful version of this story tends to get buried under the loud version promising one weird trick and a miracle cure. Plain truth never travels as fast as a wild claim does. So, if this is useful to you, hit subscribe, and you will keep grounded information in front of you instead of the next breathless thumbnail. Let's start with the olive oil, since that is what the title promised, and because it is genuinely a real and important part of the picture, even if it is not the whole of it. Icarians, like much of rural Greece, cook with olive oil as their primary fat, and they use a great deal of it, far more than the small drizzle most people elsewhere imagine. They use it not as a finishing touch, but as the foundation of cooking, pouring it generously over vegetables, beans, greens, and fish. And the type matters enormously here. What they use is extra virgin olive oil, the kind pressed from olives without heat or chemical extraction, which preserves a group of natural plant compounds called polyphenols. These polyphenols are the genuinely interesting part, not the fat itself in isolation. To understand why, it helps to walk through what extra virgin olive oil actually does inside the body, because the mechanism is real and worth knowing. The headline evidence comes from a large Spanish trial called Predimmed, the results of which were published in the New England Journal of Medicine, first in 2013 and then again in a corrected and reanalyzed form in 2018. In that trial, thousands of older adults at high cardiovascular risk were assigned to follow a Mediterranean diet supplemented with extra virgin olive oil, or a similar diet supplemented with nuts, or a lower-fat control diet. The groups eating the Mediterranean pattern with generous olive oil or nuts had roughly a 30% lower rate of major cardiovascular events, meaning heart attacks, strokes, and cardiovascular death compared to the control group. 30% is a large effect for a dietary change, the kind of number that ordinarily belongs to medication, and it came from food. So, what is the oil actually doing? Several things at once, which is part of why it works. First, the polyphenols in extra virgin olive oil act as antioxidants, helping to limit the oxidation of LDL cholesterol. This matters because it is largely oxidized LDL, not LDL on its own, that gets taken up into the artery wall and begins the slow process of plaque formation. By reducing that oxidation, the oil helps slow one of the earliest steps in heart disease. Second, those same compounds have a measurable anti-inflammatory effect. One polyphenol in particular, oleocanthal, has been shown in laboratory research to act on the same inflammatory pathways that anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen target, which is why a good peppery extra virgin olive oil produces that distinctive sting at the back of the throat. That sting is, in a real sense, the oil announcing its own activity. Third, replacing saturated fats like butter and lard with monounsaturated fat from olive oil improves the overall cholesterol picture, nudging the balance in a healthier direction over time. There is one more thing about the olive oil worth slowing down on, because it explains why the bottle you choose matters so much more than people realize. The polyphenol content of extra virgin olive oil is not fixed. It varies enormously depending on the variety of olive, how ripe the olives were when pressed, how soon after harvest they were processed, and how the oil has been stored since. Light, heat, and time all degrade those protective compounds, which is why a cheap oil sitting in a clear bottle on a sunlit shelf for a year may carry only a fraction of the polyphenols of a fresh, well-stored one, even if the label says the same words. This is also why the oil in a place like Ikaria, pressed locally from their own trees and used quickly, may be more potent than a mass-produced equivalent that has traveled and sat for months. The practical lesson is simple. Buy oil in dark glass or tin. Buy it from a source that turns over stock quickly. Look for a harvest date rather than just a best buy date, and trust your palate, because the peppery bitterness really is the taste of the active compounds. None of this requires spending a fortune. It just requires knowing that not all bottles labeled the same are the same inside. But here is where honesty matters, and where most versions of this story go wrong. The olive oil in Ikaria does not work in isolation, and there is no good evidence that olive oil alone, poured over an otherwise poor diet, produces anything like the Ikarian outcome. In the pre-dimed trial, the oil was part of a whole Mediterranean pattern, eaten alongside vegetables, legumes, fish, and whole grains. And the researchers were careful to say the benefit came from the pattern, with the oil as a central but not solitary piece. So, if you take only one thing from this video, let it be that the oil is a lever, not a magic wand, and it works because of the meal it sits inside. Let me tell you about one of the people who helped put Ikaria on the map. A man named Stamatis Moritis, a Greek who had emigrated to the United States, was diagnosed in his 60s with lung cancer and given a prognosis of less than a year to live. He decided to return to Ikaria, the island of his birth, to spend what time he had left near family, and to be buried there cheaply. On the island, he slipped back into the old rhythm. He ate the local food, drank the local wine, tended a garden, slept without an alarm, and spent long, unhurried evenings with neighbors. The months passed, and then the years. He lived, by the accounts gathered later, several decades beyond that terminal diagnosis. His story is often told as a miracle, but the more honest reading is that returning to a particular way of living seemed to do something his prognosis had not accounted for. It is a single dramatic case, not proof of anything on its own, but it is the kind of case that first made researchers ask what exactly was going on there. If you know someone who is managing their heart health and might find a grounded version of this useful, sharing this could help them far more than another miracle headline. Pass it along to them directly, because the algorithm rarely will on its own. So let's rank it. Here are 7 habits that the research on Ikaria and the other blue zones points to, ordered from the helpful to the genuinely central, with what the evidence actually supports for each. And you will notice the food is only part of it, which is the whole point. Number 7, daily natural movement rather than formal exercise. Icarians do not go to gyms. Their island is steep and hilly, and ordinary life, walking to a neighbor's house, tending a garden, climbing the slope home, builds constant low-intensity movement into the day without anyone calling it a workout. The research across blue zones consistently finds this pattern of frequent, gentle, lifelong movement rather than intense bursts of training. For an older body, this kind of steady activity supports circulation, blood sugar control, and balance, and it is far more sustainable than a punishing routine nobody keeps. Number 6, beans and legumes as a daily staple. Across nearly every long-lived population studied, beans, lentils, and chickpeas show up as a cornerstone of the everyday diet. In Ikaria, dishes built on black-eyed peas, chickpeas, and lentils appear constantly. Legumes deliver protein and a great deal of soluble fiber, which helps moderate blood sugar and lower cholesterol, and they do so at almost no cost. A diet anchored in beans is one of the most reliable patterns associated with long life anywhere on Earth. Number 5, an abundance of wild greens and vegetables. Ikaria is covered in wild edible greens, and the islanders gather and eat dozens of varieties, far more than the handful most people rotate through. These greens are dense in potassium, which works in direct opposition to sodium to ease blood pressure, and in a wide range of antioxidant compounds. The sheer variety matters, because different plants carry different protective compounds, and a diet drawing on many of them covers more ground than one leaning on a single superfood. We are at the midpoint, so a quick and sincere note. Everything in this video points to real, published research, the pre-DIME trial, and the Blue Zone's work among it, and I would genuinely rather you verify it yourself than take my word for any of it. The studies named here are searchable in a few minutes. If you ever want me to walk through one of them in detail, breaking down exactly what it found and where its limits are, that is precisely what this channel exists for. Drop a comment with the food or the place you would like examined next, because those comments genuinely shape what gets covered here. Number 4. Fish over red meat and meat only rarely. Icarians eat fish regularly, and red meat only occasionally, often reserved for special occasions rather than daily fare. Fish provides omega-3 fatty acids, which research links to lower rates of the irregular heart rhythms and clotting that contribute to cardiovascular events. Just as important is what this pattern displaces. A plate centered on fish and vegetables is a plate not centered on the processed and red meats that carry the sodium and the compounds associated with higher cardiovascular risk. The benefit is as much about absence as presence. Number 3, the way they handle stress and time. This one is harder to measure, but no less real. Icarians keep a famously relaxed relationship with the clock. They wake without alarms, take afternoon naps, and treat time as something to move through rather than race against. Chronic stress drives sustained high levels of cortisol and chronically elevated blood pressure, both of which wear on the cardiovascular system over the years. A daytime nap, which is routine on the island, has itself been associated in some research with lower cardiovascular risk. The slower relationship with time is not laziness. It is, in effect, a lifelong practice of keeping the stress response from running hot day after day. Number 2, deep and constant social connection. This is one of the most powerful and most overlooked findings in all the longevity research. Icarians live embedded in dense webs of family, neighbors, and community, with frequent gatherings, shared meals, and a strong sense of belonging that lasts into the oldest years. Large bodies of research, including long-running analyses pooling dozens of studies, have found that strong social connection is associated with significantly lower mortality, with effects on lifespan comparable in size to quitting smoking. Loneliness, by contrast, behaves in the data almost like a disease. It is worth dwelling a little longer on this social connection finding because it is the part people are most tempted to dismiss as soft and least able to afford to. The research here is genuinely robust. A large and frequently cited analysis pooling many separate studies, covering hundreds of thousands of people followed over years, found that those with strong social relationships had a substantially higher likelihood of survival over the study periods than those who were more isolated, and the size of that effect was on the order of what you see with major physical risk factors. In other words, chronic loneliness shows up in the mortality data with a weight comparable to long-recognized dangers, while rich social ties show up as protection of a similar magnitude. The proposed mechanisms are plausible and several. Connected people tend to have lower chronic stress and lower baseline blood pressure. They are more likely to be looked after when something goes wrong, to be encouraged to seek care, to be reminded to take medication, to be pulled out of the house and into movement. And there appears to be a more direct physiological dimension too, in which sustained loneliness keeps the body's stress and inflammatory systems subtly activated in ways that wear on the heart and vessels over time. The old people of Ikaria are almost never isolated, and the research suggests that is not a charming detail, but a central pillar of why they last. And number 1, the single most important truth about Ikaria is that none of these things works alone. This is the honest heart of the entire matter, and it is the exact opposite of what the One Miracle Oil headline promises. The reason Ikaria stands out is not the olive oil, not the beans, not the greens, not the naps, not the friendships taken one at a time. It is all of them, woven together across an entire lifetime, each one reinforcing the others. The oil works because of the vegetables it dresses. The movement works because the social life keeps people out and walking to see each other. The low stress works because the community catches people who would otherwise be alone. Researchers who have studied these places are remarkably consistent on this point. There is no single switch, only a pattern, and the pattern is the whole answer. One last strand is worth pulling because it widens the stakes beyond the heart. The same pattern that protects Icarian hearts appears to protect their minds. Rates of dementia among the oldest Icarians have been reported as strikingly low, and that fits what the broader research would predict, because the heart and the brain are far more connected than people tend to assume. The brain is fed by a dense network of small blood vessels, and what damages the large arteries of the heart damages those tiny vessels too. High blood pressure, oxidized cholesterol, chronic inflammation, the very things the Icarian pattern works against, are also among the drivers of the slow vascular damage that contributes to cognitive decline. So, the olive oil that limits LDL oxidation, the greens and beans that ease blood pressure, the movement that keeps circulation strong, the social life that buffers stress and keeps the mind engaged, all of it points in the same direction. Protecting the cardiovascular system and protecting the aging brain are, to a large degree, the same project pursued through the same daily habits. That is part of why this pattern is worth taking seriously, even for someone whose heart is currently fine. The faculties most people most want to keep into old age, clear thinking, memory, independence, ride on the same vessels, and are protected by the same unremarkable choices repeated across the years. Let me give you one more grounded example of what that pattern looks like in practice. Consider a 70-year-old retired schoolteacher, not on Ikaria, but in an ordinary suburb, who took this research seriously after a worrying checkup. She did not move to a Greek island or buy a single miracle product. Instead, she made several modest changes at once. She switched her cooking fat to a good extra virgin olive oil and used it generously over vegetables. She built 2 or 3 bean-based dinners into her week. She started walking to the shops instead of driving the short distance, and she made a standing plan to eat with friends twice a week rather than alone in front of the television. None of these was dramatic, but over the following months, her blood pressure eased, her cholesterol numbers improved, and, by her own account, her mood and energy lifted in a way she had not expected. Her doctor could not credit any single change, and that is exactly right, because the point was never any single change. It was the pattern, scaled down to fit one ordinary life. It is worth being very clear about what this evidence does and does not prove, because that honesty is the entire point of doing this differently. The pre-dimed trial is a genuine randomized study, which is strong evidence, though even it had to be reanalyzed after problems were found in how some participants were assigned, and the corrected results still showed the benefit. The Blue Zone's research, by contrast, is largely observational. It identifies places where people live long and looks for what they share, which reveals strong and consistent associations but cannot prove that any one habit causes the outcome. People in these places differ in many ways at once, which is precisely why no single factor can be cleanly pulled out and crowned. But the associations are remarkably consistent across very different cultures on different continents. The biological mechanisms make clear sense, and the resulting advice, eat more plants and good oil, move gently every day, stay connected to people, carries essentially no downside whatsoever. That combination is about as solid as this kind of science ever gets. So here is the practical protocol. The part anyone can act on, starting with the very next grocery trip, without moving anywhere or buying anything exotic. Step 1. Switch your main cooking fat to a genuine extra virgin olive oil, and look for one that tastes peppery and a little bitter, because that sting is the sign the protective polyphenols are actually present. Use it generously over vegetables rather than sparingly. Step 2. Build 2 or 3 bean-based meals into your week. Lentils, chickpeas, or whatever you enjoy, as the anchor of the plate rather than a side. Step 3. Crowd more vegetables and leafy greens onto the plate, aiming for variety across the week, rather than the same 2 or 3 on repeat, because different plants carry different protective compounds. Step 4. Shift the center of your meals from red and processed meat toward fish and plants, keeping red meat as an occasional thing rather than a daily one. Step 5. Build gentle movement into ordinary life. A daily walk, the stairs instead of the elevator, time in a garden, rather than relying on intense workouts you will not keep. Step 6. And do not skip this one because it sounds soft. Protect your social connections as deliberately as your diet. Make standing plans to share meals and time with people because the research treats this as a genuine health behavior, not a nicety. Step 7. Keep taking any medication exactly as prescribed and tell your doctor about the changes you are making so they can monitor your blood pressure and cholesterol and adjust if needed, because real improvement may mean your treatment should be revisited, and that is their call to make with you. And throughout all of it, give it honest time, because these are patterns that pay off over months and years, not overnight. And that is the whole of it, start to finish. Notice, there is nothing here you need to buy beyond a good bottle of olive oil and a bag of beans, and no fear you need to carry around all day. Just a clear-eyed look at how one remarkable place actually lives, and a sensible way to borrow the parts of it that translate to an ordinary life far from any Greek island. The magic was never one oil. It was a whole way of eating and living, and the genuinely encouraging news is that almost all of it is within reach, starting this week, in your own kitchen and your own neighborhood. If this was useful, the most helpful thing you can do is leave a comment naming the place or the food you would like examined next, because that genuinely steers what gets covered here, and share it with someone who would benefit from hearing the grounded version rather than the miracle one. And if you want the natural companion to this, the next video looks closely at the Mediterranean diet itself, exactly what the trials showed, what a real week of meals looks like, and how to build the whole pattern on an ordinary budget without feeling deprived for a single day. That is the constructive other half of this story, and it is genuinely worth watching next.